This is the first part of two lectures where I'll be looking at Saba Mahmood's political and religious theories. This first one is going to be looking at agency and women's piety. The second one will be looking at Western secular theology and the ways that that theology has framed Western ideas about politics and the difference in space between politics and religion. This first one, again, we're going to be looking at the concept of agency, which we've already looked at through both Walker Bynum's work as well as Judith Butler's work, and looking at ways that women's piety, specifically in the areas, non-Western areas that Mahmood examines and explores, how women's piety is itself a field of political endeavor that does not fit within the Western secular political framework. The modern liberal state is based upon an assumption that the secular and the religious are incompatible and exist in entirely separate spheres. In fact, the secular should be in the public, while the religious should be kept private, domestic. The public should be protected from the religious, based on the assumption that the religious and the secular are inherently contradictory. Actually, Mahmood argues the secular is an area of power which constantly attempts to manage the boundaries of the religious, telling where the religious where it can and can't be, through shifting its own definition of what is and is not religious. In this way, Mahmood argues that the secular is actually entirely reliant upon the religious, as secular only gains a sense of its own boundaries by constructing the walls which separate secular from religious. In this way, the secular actually derives its power, according to Mahmood, by a parasitic and oppressive dominance relationship over religion. It constructs what is and is not religious in a way that serves its own needs. For example, by defining religion as simply a private sphere activity, reducible to a grouping of propositional beliefs, the secular can domesticate religion. It can defang religion. It can give it less power. It can put it in a box and shove it off somewhere, while maintaining all of the power over any question of ethics, social constructions, identity, and meaning. Now, Mahmoud demonstrated that these narratives the secular tells itself about itself are not universal, and they're not inherent in the construction of the modern state. Secularism is as much constructed and created as anything else, and is thoroughly dependent on very specific historical, institutional, and philosophical contexts and conditions. She established a separation between political secularism, which is the state regulation of religion, secularism, which is the force which sustains the normativity of secular life, that which sort of makes secular life secular, and secularity, the beliefs, sensibilities, frameworks, and hermeneutics, there's the word again, contexts, worldviews, hermeneutics, which both amplify secularism and the secular, and are, in a move demonstrating how interconnected they actually are, that are amplified by secularism and the secular. Mahmoud punctured this self-congratulatory narrative of the modern liberal secular state and demonstrated that its assumed eclipse of religion, its power, its winning the battle over religion and tradition, were as much myths as are the false narratives, and she says, of individual sovereignty, freedom, religious liberty as the grand achievements of the secular. Instead, they are not secular achievements and might not actually even be achievements. Why is that? Now, Mahmoud's most important work, which addressed this issue was Politics of Piety, the Islamic Revival and the Feminist Subject. It was an ethnography. It was an exploration of the cultures and ideas of a people, of the women's piety movement in Egypt, which was itself bound up with the wider movement over the last few decades of Islamic revival. It also reflected on the challenges with the dominant assumptions of modern liberal feminist thought regarding the meanings and limitations of concepts such as agency, freedom, and subjectivity. So, in a way, Mahmoud is both contending with, pushing back against, but also trying to figure out a way to coexist with Judith Butler and the ideas that she's speaking about. Mahmoud rejects the liberal feminist assumption that agency, or ability to exert power, to be a subject, is mainly defined by a woman's ability to resist and to subvert any overarching structures of power, which could be patriarchy, religious authority, divine sovereignty, etc. The result of this framework is that if one doesn't actively reject these structures, patriarchy, religion, God, that women actually lack agency. So in this construction, Mahmoud argues, agency equals resistance, and resistance to structures defined as inherently oppressive and dangerous to others. Now, Mahmoud asks the question, can an alternative definition of agency be crafted which isn't bound to resistance? What does liberal feminism miss, censor, hide, or maybe lose out on by establishing these binaries of subversion, submission, resistance, acquiescence? The women's piety movement attracts women across class and backgrounds who want to live a virtuous and pious life in relation to the norms and bounds of Islam. There's a rejection of the ways that they feel that Western ideals and secularism have reduced religious practices and norms to simply conventions or artifacts, cultural artifacts, stripped of devotional power and meaning. It is a return instead to piety on both an individual and a societal level. Okay, that second societal aspect is a key aspect here. Now, da'wah, the urging of Muslims to greater piety, plays a significant role in this. This movement stressed the important role women preachers and teachers play in da'yat, which I know I'm mispronouncing, the work of da'wah. Pedagogy, or ways someone's educated, thus plays a significant role in her book. Now, the da'wah depends on a process of ethical cultivation. Women's agency, Mahmoud argues, actually resides in their ability to train and discipline their body and mind in relationship of voluntary subordination to the exact structures that liberal feminism demands that women subvert and resist. Akin to developing any complex skill and mindset, such as learning a musical instrument or a foreign language, ethical cultivation demands training and developing a mindset of discipline to external authorities. This follows Foucault, actually, in his claim that the actor, somebody who acts, who does things, gains agency through embracing specific relations of subordination. Again, you choose to be subordinate. You choose to be disciplined by a structure and a framework of ideas. These the women are subverting and resisting authority, but they're resisting and subverting from the inside of the religion and using its own tools against it. So we have to reframe what political actually means. Political is defined by the liberal secular state as engaging in its processes, now it would be elections, democratic governance, etc. But this definition imposes a limitation on what politics is to a very small sphere of power and actions. Instead, politics can be seen as the interactions between agents, people with agency, who exercise their power to impact social structures and social dynamics. Thus, politics is anything which involves the ways which people interact with each other and seek to exert agency over their individual and social lives. The power of projects like the women's piety movement lies with their ability to shape moral reform at both the individual and the social level. By shaping ethics, these movements shape how women, and often by extension their entire families, can shape the ways in which power is managed and used in the public sphere. This is an explicit rejection of the binary between public sphere of rational politics, and politics meaning decision making and processes and elections and everything else, and private devotional life. Instead, the women's piety movement argued that they are inextricably connected. Religion is thus not the inverse of the secular, the opposite. It could be said that the secular and its realm of politics is itself a realm of the religious. Now, Mahmood sought to identify moments when the definitions and constructions, logics, the logics of something, and practices of piety escaped liberal secular assumptions and expectations. She focused on the ways that liberal secularism's view of traditional markers of women's submission to patriarchy, which is the cultivation of the virtue of shyness in women and the wearing of the veil in Islam, was actually dramatically incomplete. In liberal feminist frameworks, these are seen as perfect examples of women subordinating their agency to patriarchy because they seem to demonstrate how patriarchy uses its power to demand women's adherence to external norms devised by and serving the needs of patriarchy. Now, Mahmood does not actually deny that at one level, shyness and the veil are actually accessions or, acceptances to the power of patriarchy. She's not judging the actions of the piety movement as much as translating their logics, their way of thinking, in a way that's understandable and can demonstrate how such logics work in other settings, including likely religious communities in the liberal secular West. That's not the point, though. Instead, the focus should be on the fact that being trained in the discipline of a virtue, or a habitus, a way of being, is paradoxically what provides a subject to even possess and use agency in the first place. So only by actually learning this virtue, by being disciplined in the actions of the virtue, of all of the aspects that are in the life of being a woman in Islam, only by learning that, by disciplining themselves, by training themselves in this way, are they ever actually gaining the skills and the empowerment to actually act and be empowered and to have agency. So Islam is actually helping them to have the agency that secular feminism in the West, in its constructions of that, are actually saying they don't have because of Islam. Mahmood argues that it's entirely the opposite.